Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to this Techstrong learning experience brought to you by AWS and Nordcloud. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of Techstrong Learning, and we have an exciting panel ahead. Before I kick things off, I do have just a couple of housekeeping notes I'd like to cover. Today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion, perhaps you'd like to rewatch or maybe share with a friend. The on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude this live session today. Now, this is going to be a largely interactive and conversation-based program, so please do engage with us. There are a couple ways that you can do so. The first of which is the chat tab on the right side of your screen. Go ahead and start warming that up for us now by letting us know from where you are joining us today. I know we are reaching quite a lot of time zones, so I do want to see where everyone's coming from. Now, if you do have questions, it does help us keep track of them if you send those into that Q&A tab, which can be found directly to the right of the chat. So as I said, please send in any questions as you have throughout our conversation today. We would love to get them incorporated and answer any concerns that you may have. We do have a couple of polls that we will be launching throughout our program today, so keep an eye out when those pop up. Should just be 3 in total. And if you click over to the handout section, you'll see there is a downloadable PDF version of our slides, as well as there's a resource at the end of the slides that I will just go ahead and put into that handout section for you. So feel free to grab that as well. Of course, before we close out, we are giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So be sure to stick around for the duration of our conversation. And we're going to go ahead and get things kicked off. Our discussion today is application modernization with AWS ECS serverless compute. And we're going to be talking about running secure and cost-effective container-based solutions at scale. Our panel today consists of, Carl Quigley, AWS Partner Sales Manager at Nordcloud, Stefan Christ, AWS Senior Cloud Architect at Nordcloud, and Jan Sola, Chief Technology Officer at W3Schools. So Carl, Stefan, and Jan, thank you all so much for joining us today. Carl, let's go ahead and get things kicked off with a question. Why do Nordcloud customers consider using a container platform?
Thanks, Cody. I guess some of the things we're seeing from our customers at Nordcloud at the moment is the need to speed things up in their business. Be more agile with things like their applications and offerings to their business and customers, which serverless compute and containerization offer them as a solution. With containerization, this offers customers the ability to write once and write anywhere, meaning you can take your application just about anywhere without rebuilding it for a new environment, hence making it faster and more efficient. Also, containers require less system resources than the traditional hardware or software virtual machine environments because they don't include operating system images, meaning applications running on these solutions run faster and can be deployed much more easily to multiple platforms, which in turn speed things up like development and new releases. As we're going to be discussing further in this session, there are many benefits of using containerization and things like that in a business for applications. Speed, scalability, and efficiency, making apps faster to set up and making it more easy to scale out the business and reach more of a market. Applications running in containers can be deployed easily, to multiple different operating systems and hardware platforms. And back to my point earlier around making it easier and faster, you write once and you can run it anywhere. And lastly, things like security, making it more improved by isolating the applications from the host systems and from each other. Hence, when there is malware function and stuff like that, then they don't, contaminate each other in the environments.
All right, well, let's get a feel of our audience a little bit here, and I'd like to ask a question. So I'm going to launch our first polling question. And so to our audience, our first polling question I'd like you to answer asks, are you considering containers for your business? And I guess this includes if you are already using containers for your business, you'd want to go ahead and click yes. But answers are yes or no. Carl, do you have any kind of guess about which direction you think this is going to go?
I would hope in this day and age that we've got a lot of people on the session that are looking at using containers, if not already. Like I mentioned earlier, if they're looking for that speed and agility and not having to rewrite things multiple times to different systems, I would hope yes. But let's see what they say.
Well, I think you were astoundingly confirmed here.
There we go. Go on the right webinar, right?
Yeah. So this doesn't surprise you at all?
Not at all. Not at all. That's great to see.
Good to hear. Good to hear. All right. So, Stefan, let's shift it a little bit. How does Nordcloud think about modernizing these existing applications to reduce costs and gain efficiencies? And how do you make the most out of those existing investments?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Cody, and hi everybody at home. So at Nordcloud, we know that for 99% of all workloads that you run in the cloud or in AWS, you get the biggest return on investment by making your workload as cloud native as possible. So the way we think about this is that whenever possible, you should prefer a serverless service. And then obviously serverless is the holy grail, let's say. Then you have your containers, and then you have your traditional virtual machines or EC2 instances, as they're called in AWS. And the thing is, even within containers, we would prefer serverless containers over the traditional clusters that you have to manage yourself. The idea is that you get away from patching an operating system and managing that kind of technology. So when a customer decides to go for a container-based workload, we work with them to choose between one of the offerings that AWS has. So that would be Amazon ECS, the Elastic Container Service, Amazon EKS, the Elastic Container Service for Kubernetes, and then also AWS Fargate, which is basically a serverless launch type, where instead of saying, I want a virtual machine with 2 CPU cores and 8 gigabytes of RAM to run this workload, you just say, I need a container that has these resources, and the underlying operating system and all that is abstracted away from you. So that's the difference between, I guess, those platforms. And we work with the customer on what is the best solution there. So if a customer already has Kubernetes experience and they want to continue with that, then obviously Amazon EKS seems to be a good fit. But for most workloads, if they're a little bit smaller, Kubernetes is a large beast, and it might make sense to go for something smaller and use Amazon ECS and the Fargate launch type for that. That obviously is also a really valid option, and a lot of customers are using that. So yeah, that's us in a nutshell, I guess. Like I said, Nordcloud prefers serverless over containers over virtual machines, and we can use any container orchestrator that is out there for your project.
So whenever we are looking at a successful modernization product, what are we looking for? What are those indicators?
Yeah, the top markers for a successful modernization is that you have that top-down and bottom-up commitment to make the modernization a success. What I mean by that is the bottom-up part is obviously the people that put their hands on the keyboard and they do the heavy lifting of the migration or modernization. They need to be in favor of the technology and be on board with it. But also upper management needs to have a clear business value or a business plan in mind. And once you have that congruency, the modernization is usually a success. It's definitely one of the markers we see time and time again. And with that in mind, to derive maybe a good business case or see where you can get the most business value, we have a resources section or a handout section as part of this webinar where you can download some slides that we'll be presenting. In the slides, there's a resources section that links to running containers on AWS. That's a page that Nordcloud offers where there's a bit of information, but at the very bottom, there is a form where you can leave some information and we'll get in touch with you. You get a free evaluation of your landscape where we look at maybe 1 or 2 workloads that could really benefit from a modernization. And then we'll work with you on modernizing that if you like what you see. That's also a link in the handout section directly, so you don't have to download the slides. But if you want to take advantage of that, feel free to get in touch. We do the free evaluation, no strings attached, And if you like what you see, we can do the project together.
So let's say they take you up on that offer. How quickly do you think this modernization can be executed on a typical project?
Yeah. Unfortunately, the answer here is it depends. There's really no such thing as a typical project. It depends how many skills or what kind of skill level you have in-house, how many hands are on deck to do this modernization. But also, not every modernization is equal. So if you, let's say, migrating from virtual machines into containers, containerizing an application is pretty straightforward and generally doesn't need much refactoring. But if you have, let's say, a virtual machine-based application that you want to refactor into a bunch of microservices, then you need to sort of take the application apart and do a lot of refactoring. Or if your modernization takes containers into a serverless world where you have suddenly event-driven architecture and an event-driven application, there's generally a lot of refactoring of the application involved as well. So it really depends, but it can take anything from a few months to a few years to complete a modernization. I think, Jan Magne, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think once Nordcloud got involved with W3Schools, the project took about maybe 3 months to complete from start to finish.
Yeah, that's right. The full project was done in 3 months.
Yeah. So yeah, feel free to involve someone like Nordcloud, an AWS partner, to basically help with the migration if you need it done more urgently and you need it. You have a data center exit or something where you need to migrate and modernize out of the data center, then we can definitely help with that.
Awesome. So let's go ahead and take time for another poll here. So this poll is going to ask you, are you using containers now and looking to modernize? It's just a yes or no. Stefan, what do you think? What do you think is going to show up here? What do you where do you think it's going to go?
I am leaning strongly towards yes, just based on the title of the webinar. I think everybody's in the right room based on the first poll. I think we'll have a strong response towards yes.
Well, let's see. Once we get a couple more of these responses, and we'll put those right up. And I think we got a good split.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There we go.
All right. Well, let's ask one that maybe may not have as clear of an answer here with this audience. What are you considering? Are you considering ECS, EKS, or AWS Fargate? And if you have any questions about any of these, go ahead and throw those in the Q&A. Throw them in the chat. We'd love to address those for you. Jan, do you have any idea of where this one might go between ECS, EKS, and Fargate?
Yeah, maybe the middle one with EKS, just since Kubernetes has been around for a while. So let's see.
Wow.
Even split?
I didn't expect that.
No. Interesting.
Yeah, my money would have been on AWS Fargate, but there you go.
Is there a specific reason for that? I'm curious.
Why I would have bet on that? Simply because, then you're not running your own clusters of operating systems that you have to patch and these kind of things. Managing a fleet of servers, you just worry about the container. Unless you have reasons not to do that, I think that's the easier way, because then, in this case, AWS would manage it for you.
Perfect. So let's go ahead. I'm seeing a couple of questions come in, so we are going to get to those, and I do want everyone to continue sending those in. But we're going to get to those here in just a minute. Jan, I want to see where W3Schools plays into all of this. So tell us a little bit more about what y'all do over there at W3Schools.
Sure, Cody. W3Schools was founded way back in 1998 by the Refsnes family in a small place in Norway called Hommersåk, located on the southwest coast here, and has since grown to become one of the largest resources in the world for learning and practicing web development, as probably many of you already know. We have a wide variety of tutorials and accompanying services that covers like all major programming languages, databases, frameworks, etc. And we have a strong belief that learning web development should be easy to understand and available for everyone, everywhere, no matter your background or your location. And for like traffic numbers, we're seeing around 75 million user visits a month right now, and over 3.5 billion page views annually. So traffic numbers are quite high, I would say.
And what can you tell us about what W3Schools Spaces? What role does that play here?
Yeah, Spaces is an easy-to-use coding sandbox and simple hosting service that's used by our users to practice what they learn via the tutorials. And the first version was released to the people of the internet in May of 2021. Yeah.
Very nice. Is there anything else you can tell us about it as far as like what it supports or kind of what direction it's headed?
Yeah, sure. Spaces, in its first iteration that was launched in 2021, only supported creating static websites using basic HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. But we had been thinking a while, also before the launch of the first version, to add support for server-side programming languages to be able to accompany our users to practice more of our vast learning material. So we put some ideas on paper. We contacted Amazon's Oslo team to get their take on it. And we had some good discussions starting early 2022 with numerous solution architects there, among others Stefan, which is working for Nordcloud now. Stefan, which is right here. Yeah. But then Amazon quickly introduced us to Nordcloud, and we kicked off like this preliminary project, looking into different options of making this happen in April that same year. And this preliminary project ended in June with a kind of basic but fully functional prototype. And we had like a really quick go decision from our side to make the full project that also Stefan mentioned kicked off in September that year. And we worked together both with resources from Amazon and Nordcloud, and also the team from W3Schools. And we had a feature complete version of this project running in production in February this year. So there's been a good cooperation with W3Schools, Amazon, and Nordcloud.
So in those early stages, what criteria were you looking for? What was the most important during those early stages of getting that transformation?
Yeah, like from the start, we usually have a list of criteria we always follow when designing our services, where the most important things are security, because we have a lot of users, and expanding the Spaces service to also support server-side languages opens up a lot of possibilities for abuse if not handled correctly. So security is always at the top of our list of criteria. Then automation, because we really want as little human intervention as possible when running our service in production. And then, of course, we need to think about scalability, because we are enjoying a large amount of traffic, and that needs to be handled. We cannot accept any downtime for our users. So scalability is also important. And then, of course, total cost of ownership is also important for any service we run, because we will need our services to be highly cost effective, since competition in the market space is quite fierce. So those 4 criteria are what we are always looking for: security, automation, scalability, and cost.
So when you were doing your homework and looking for platforms, I'm sure you looked at many platforms. What were some of the alternatives that you looked at before falling where you did?
Yeah, we sure did. We did our due diligence before also starting this preliminary project with Nordcloud, and of course also before starting the full project. So initially, together with Amazon solution architects, we looked at some creative ways of using serverless functions, which of course Amazon calls lambdas, where you could use third-party frameworks to support both PHP and Python. But we decided not to pursue those further at that time, mainly due to long deployment times when doing or when the user does code changes. They were from our initial tests in the minute range, so that would be like unacceptable from a user's point of view. We then quickly also looked at using WebAssembly in some way, but at the time it seemed a bit premature, both due to limited browser and also language support, at least as running it as a somewhat generic solution, like browser-based. So we instead decided to investigate running a container-based solution, and we're at first thinking about creating something from scratch, using either Docker Swarm or Kubernetes, but we quickly decided that time to production would be too high there. So then, together with Amazon and Nordcloud, we started looking at Amazon's offerings, and they sure have a lot of ways to run containers, and Stefan can probably correct me there, but I think it's around 17 or 18 different ways of running containers. So it's kind of hard to choose from the start, but based on guidance from Nordcloud and Amazon, we started looking at some of their larger services, which we have also talked a little bit about earlier on the webinar. So first out was Elastic Kubernetes Service, which is, like Stefan said, Amazon's flavor of Kubernetes. It will automate away some stuff like handling control plane and other things. And the positives there was its flexibility, but based on our previous experience, you will need people in-house with skills, Kubernetes skills, to maintain the thing. So yeah, that's of course costly. And also there's always a potential security risk with container breakouts there, and security is our top criteria. So yeah, that's kind of a negative thing based on how we run this setup. And then we looked at Elastic Container Service, which is Amazon's fully managed container orchestration service. Has like 2 options for running the workloads, either EC2 bare metal instances or via Fargate, which is the serverless alternative, like Stefan mentioned. And then, like this option of running ECS on EC2 instances, we found positives there to be high flexibility and of course also performance. And also quite secure by adding Firecracker, which is a lightweight and highly secure virtual machine solution. But we found that the negatives with this combination to be really the EC2 instances that will need some continuous TLC for patches, upgrade, etc. You will need to handle that yourself. And there's also the potential risk of container breakouts for that combination. Final option there was checking out running ECS on the Fargate serverless option. And there, of course, we found that the large positive side there was that the operational overhead of scaling, patching, and managing the servers disappears. And it's also highly secure because it has workload isolation by design. So that checks off the security and automation criteria from our point of view. But the negative part of things there is that it is quite costly. But there is a possibility to run on spot instances, which is a lot cheaper. It's like almost half the price. But what you need to take into account when running your workloads on spot instances is that there's no real uptime guarantee. So there will be task terminations due to spot capacity being pulled. And that will then, of course, need to be handled to not ruin the user experience. And it will add to the complexity of the solution. So those were kind of the main options we looked at during the initial phase of the project.
And where did you kind of fall? I mean, that sounds like a lot of combinations, a lot of options. What combination did you end up going with, and why that combination?
Yeah, I think based on my negative, positive remarks during the run-through of the previous question, kind of gave it away. But we ended up choosing running Elastic Container Service with the serverless Fargate option, and also using spot instances. Because this was the alternative that checked most, if not all, of the boxes from our list of criteria. That is, tasks will run in their own dedicated runtime environment. So it's highly, because it has workload isolation by design. That checks off the security criteria. And then we have the fact that it automates away scaling, patching, securing, and managing servers. And that checks off automation. And then our thought was that cost when running on spot instances was acceptable. So that also checked off the cost perspective. So we ended up with running on Fargate.
So I know every situation does have those drawbacks. So what challenges did you run into with the solution you found?
Yeah, to be fair, there were no major issues. The whole project was more or less smooth sailing, to be honest. But of course, there are always some challenges, and I can walk through some of those. The fact that we were running on spot instances, and these may be terminated. It's done on a 2-minute notice, so you really need to do your cleanup, backups, etc. during those 2 minutes, and then launch a new task, deploying the user's code, etc., and then start the container for the user. So that was something we used some time to handle, these spot terminations. And also, due to the high amount of users we have, we had to orchestrate clusters into different accounts and regions, both due to account and service limits in Amazon, but also due to spot availability in the different regions. You never know ahead of time what kind of availability there is for spot. So you need to handle it not being available right there and then. Another issue we had to tackle was that some of our container images are quite large. Our Rust and Java images are among the biggest there. So initial deployments for the users could take a very long time during the create space phase. But this was worked, or that issue was worked around by adding a task pooling feature, which then greatly reduced the deployment time to increase the user experience. So that was kind of the major issues we had to tackle during the project.
All right. So an issue that I think of is if you're committing to the ECS and Fargate combination, are you worried about vendor lock-in with both of those being AWS programs?
Yeah, of course, that's always a possibility. And when time is short and you take shortcuts, you may end up in stuff that's more or less locked in. But we've always had a focus on flexibility at W3Schools and cost efficiency, portability when designing our services. And we have also tried to be as cloud agnostic as possible, using open standards and tools wherever possible. Thus, I would say, like in practice, we're really not that worried about vendor lock-in at this moment.
All right. Well, so you did mention that W3Schools has about 75 million monthly users. That's a lot of monthly users. Did that have any kind of influence on the design that you went with?
Yeah, it sure did. The higher amount of users and traffic we see will always influence our service design. We, of course, need to make sure that our users are protected from a lot of potential security issues. And they also demand a responsive system and also a cost-effective system, so that in addition to the focus on security, scalability and cost are factors that are always important for us to control based on the high amount of traffic we see. And also, of course, due to our many users with different backgrounds and skill levels, ease of use is in the, front seat, that we need to create easy-to-use user interfaces, etc., so that all our user base can enjoy our services.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate that deep dive into your solution and the role that W3Schools plays into this. I do kind of want to take a step back and look at the topic from a little bit of a higher angle, and also bring Carl and Stefan back into the mix a little bit. But Carl, let's start with you. Do you have any thoughts about the future of containers, or maybe where this is going?
I guess thoughts are, I think more and more customers are starting to look at it in terms of a way to consolidate, speed things up, save money. I think everything that Jan alluded to in his session just then kind of echoed the points that myself and Stefan are seeing in our business as well. We are starting to see more and more customers go down this route for the reasons that we've given. There are other ways to go, as we all know. However, I think when you're looking to roll out, I guess, applications and services multiple times in different regions and that kind of stuff, I think this is absolutely one of the key, I guess, technology areas to look at. And yeah, I think when we're looking to build skills internally at Nordcloud, we're looking at these kinds of technology areas to build our skills even further. We are, I guess, renowned for being kind of migration partner and that kind of stuff in terms of, we also do lift and shift out of server environments and data centers into AWS and alternatives. But once they're in those environments, then how do we modernize and make them things like cloud native and stuff like that? And I think that seems to be the next step for customers when they're looking to modernize their business. Obviously, Jan was W3Schools are a business that they didn't really have any legacy-based technology, if that makes sense. So they were going straight in with that containerization, modernization piece. But we are starting to see more and more customers where they've moved into AWS, or their applications now reside in an AWS environment, now how do we modernize them and make them serverless and cloud native? And we've got various services to assist with that in terms of TCO analysis and looking at what they've got at the moment and how we can save them money by doing it this way. And like I said earlier, speeding things up, making it far easier to replicate those services and applications in different areas and environments without having to rewrite every time you do that. So I think that those seem to be the key areas that we're looking at. I think, like I said, our areas of expertise and where we're looking to add more skill sets to our or more strings to our bow, if you want to call it that. There's certainly areas that we're looking to do that in. So it's an ever-growing part of our business, but I think we're not even scratching the surface in terms of customers that are looking to start that journey with us. So there's a lot more that can be done.
So Jan, as a user of all this, what is there any kind of future modernization that you will expect to find in this process, or anything that you want to see change in this field?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think like having these things more or less fully automated would make sense. There's still a lot of, or not a lot of, but you still have to create your own logic around things when running this at scale. So I'd like to see some form of like having this mature a little bit and then automating away even more than already has been.
Mm-hmm. Following up on that, yeah, Magne, do you see this going into a fully serverless solution as well over time? I mean, you mentioned before there were frameworks that didn't quite have the deployment times that were needed to make this a viable product, but let's say we overcome this.
Yeah, I certainly hope so, because cost and also like development work is like reduced to a minimum with these pure serverless solutions. So yeah.
That is also something I see. Cody, you asked earlier about the future of containers, and obviously Carl answered that quite nicely from the angle of Nordcloud and our business offerings. But just looking at it from a technology perspective, what you notice is that the unit of compute that people want to run is getting smaller and smaller. So we now have serverless functions like AWS Lambda, where an event comes in that just triggers a tiny bit of code that will then go and deal with that and basically go back to sleep until it's needed again. And now that you can run AWS Lambda functions based on a container image as well, I think that's quite an exciting trend, because that means you have very short-lived containers that are just out there. When an event comes into the system, the container gets fired up, it does its job, and then it ceases to exist. Whereas previously, or for most of the workloads, I would say containers are just a way of shipping the software or deploying the software in a different style to traditional servers. But now we're seeing this evolution where they're very short-lived and they only exist for a small purpose. And then once that's done, they go away and you stop paying for this. And I think, this whole event-driven side coming to the container ecosystem is quite exciting. So I see maybe a little bit more of that in the future, also across other players, not just on AWS.
So what role do guardrails play here? I know with these flexible containers, there's lots of variation and provisions and runtimes, and what kind of best practices are there to make sure that you're on top of these things? Or if you take the fully managed, self-managed approach, is there any best practice? Or or with your experience in Fargate, is there definitely an advantage that you've seen?
I think there's nothing new in terms of best practices when it comes to AWS Fargate. You're still meant to have small container image sizes, right? If your image is several gigabytes, it will be really sluggish to load and operate. So the smaller your image, the better. Have as few layers in your Docker image as possible. These kind of things. But this is nothing new. These are just Docker best practices. When it comes to the serverless side, as in using AWS Fargate, there isn't that much new and exciting to it in that sense when it comes to best practices. You just you get an elastic network interface in AWS, an ENI that gets provisioned somewhere in your subnet that lets you talk to the container that's obviously running somewhere in the AWS ecosystem. You don't have any control over where. So in terms of best practices, nothing really changes. It's just a slightly different way of operating it, and it stops you from doing things that might not be best practices, like doing a Docker exec into your running production container that you probably shouldn't be doing anyway. With AWS Fargate, for a long time, there was no way of sending commands to that container at all. But obviously, AWS have come up with solutions around that. But still, it is probably best practice to not do that in the first place. Yeah.
All right. So Jan, if people are getting started, what advice do you have for them, for the attendees of this webinar per se? What you've been through the process. Do you have anything you'd say as far as how they can get started, or maybe what road bumps they could expect to hit early on?
Yeah, I would say seek advice at the earliest stage possible, either from some of the cloud service providers directly or from some of their partners like Nordcloud. And of course, when problem solving, it's always important to start small and keep things simple, create prototypes. And it's, of course, also really important to make sure that you adapt your current architecture to utilize cloud-native solutions so that you just do not treat the cloud as a generic bare metal server in the sky. And we talked about it earlier as well, automate everything and make sure to put stuff into production as quickly as possible, mainly for getting quick user feedback. We love that at W3Schools, but also to make sure that your technical assumptions are tested thoroughly. I would say that's the advice we could give. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I thought I was on mute. Okay. So how realistic were those ARR assumptions that were made whenever you started those assessments?
Yeah, I would say they were as realistic as was possible at the time. We based our predictions on data gathered from running other services and also numbers that we crunched from running Spaces, the first version, for almost 1 year in production. And I would say that we're still confident that we will reach our goals and that the current adoption rate of this second version of Spaces seems to support this. But as you know, as always, time will show.
And so have you heard any kind of feedback from the community, the W3Schools, and how everyone's feeling about the new platform?
Yeah, the initial feedback from our users has been really good. And we've gotten that both via Discord community, but also directly from users contacting us via support channels, etc. But to be honest, some of our users still find part of the service a little bit advanced. So we are answering a lot of coding questions, or how do we do this and that? How do we set up this and that database, etc. in the running containers? But we are actively working on remedying these kind of, I would say, struggles that users are having with continuous upgrades. Because the most important focus for W3Schools is and will always be our end users. So we are listening closely to our end users.
All right. So Stefan, I see you are responding to a couple of questions that we have received in the chat. I just want to make sure that we bring those into the fold today. Is there anything that you've been responding to that we haven't actually covered on the air just yet?
Right. Let me quickly go through. I think we've covered a lot of them. There were some questions around AWS Lambda, and I mean, I did touch on the fact that you can run a container image within a Lambda function. Unfortunately, given that this with W3Schools didn't choose that solution, like it's not going to be a major topic today. There was a question around Nordcloud, where the name comes from. It is not related to NordVPN. It is simply because the company was started in Finland and is headquartered in Finland, quite a northern part of the world. So Nordcloud, that's where the name comes from. Going through the questions now, I don't think there was anything that we haven't addressed yet. So I'm pretty happy with that.
Yeah, just on that note, I think it's important to note that we're part of IBM as well. So we are Nordcloud, an IBM company. However, we are our own company in our own right. We're not governed in any way by IBM, but they acquired the business 2.5 years ago, I think, Stefan.
Mm-hmm.
So we're an entity of IBM now. So the full backing, if you like.
Mm. That's right. I actually just saw a comment in the chat around Fargate having limited control of the underlying infrastructure. That is absolutely correct. And it is a very good reason why you might not want to use serverless containers if you need to run something on a network optimized instance, or you need a lot of CPU power, more than AWS Fargate can give you in a single task. Then unfortunately it won't be the solution for you, and you have to look for something else, like maybe ECS on the EC2 launch type, where you run your typical EC2 instances, and then you take network optimized instances, or maybe Kubernetes or something. But AWS Fargate, you have very limited control over the underlying infrastructure, sadly.
So let's go into maybe how we can get started with a modernization. Is there anything that a team should be prepared for, or that anything an organization can do to make sure its teams are prepared for a modernization journey? Any specific skills or capacities that team needs to have?
Yeah, I'm guessing this is an open question to the entire panel.
Whoever gets to it first.
I could take a step. I think it's important that when you're modernizing towards a certain technology, that your staff is trained to that technology. Time and time, we see, let's say, in a cloud transformation, which is obviously a very different beast to a modernization project, that some members of staff might worry that they're no longer are needed after the modernization, after the transformation, because the infrastructure will now be managed by AWS, and what do they do? So it's important to work with the staff around those concerns, skilling them up so they can use the technology that you're modernizing into, and then also making sure that they furthermore have a place in the company. It is quite important to do that, and it's quite beneficial to do that, because these people know your product start to front, but also they will then be freed up to innovate on behalf of the customer, instead of just keeping the lights on in a data center or plugging in some cables. All of that will then be done by AWS. So I think making sure that you have the right skills for where you're modernizing into is a big one. I'm leaving some others.
No, yeah, completely. I think we pride ourselves on being an enablement partner for customers. We don't want to go in there and overtake their IT environments and teams, like Stefan mentioned, and have people thinking about redundancy and stuff like that. We want to empower these customers that we work with to work with the technology that we're helping them to deploy. So we are an ATP partner of AWS, so we're a training partner, which means that we can go in and train their staff in terms of how to use this technology and how to manage it themselves. Yes, we're an MSP, so we can manage it for them as well, but we also like to empower customers to do the same. So, and freeing their time up to go and do other things in the business that may be deemed more important or more critical to their business. So, just echoing Stefan's point there, really.
So I know there are cost implications when it comes to modernizing our operations. And I know sometimes leadership may not want to be on board with additional costs until you can really show that ROI. So what kind of advice would you have for someone who's trying to get leadership on board for this journey to begin?
Yeah, I think I would have advice that is twofold, and that is number one, talk to an AWS partner in this case, someone like Nordcloud. They can help you get funding from AWS, and that is the second part of the advice. Every cloud provider will have different programs to, give you some credits towards, let's say, a migration as you migrate into the cloud, because obviously for some time you'll have workloads running on your traditional data center as well as in the cloud. And just to mitigate that double cost of having the workload in two places, there's usually some credits you can get and these kind of things. So work with a partner because they will know the programs of the cloud provider very well, and then also work with the cloud provider to see what discounts they can give you. More often than not, they will really sweeten the deal, and you're also then already on track to working with the cloud provider down the line, and you have a foot in the door to sort of getting some attention. Yeah, that would be my advice.
Yeah, I look at that as well. I think this is our day job. This is what we do as a business and have done for the last 10, 12 years. So utilize the skills that we have and the knowledge we've got and the access to the funding programs and various teams within AWS that maybe customers don't have. And then, it makes it a lot easier for them to get on that journey and start the process of the migration or the modernization project they've got. So, just echoing again what Stefan's just mentioned. Get in touch if you need assistance in any way. Absolutely.
And Jan, to kind of hit you with a variation of that question, what was the final pushing factor that got you on board with this modernization process? Was there something a straw that broke the camel's back that said, all right, we've got to move to more container-based workloads?
Yeah, I would say that's kind of based on previous experiences and stuff I walked through with our initial preliminary project. That was, of course, deciding factors, what we ended up discovering there, and also this program that with credits that Stefan mentioned was, of course, also a push in the right direction for us to go for this project, really.
All right. Well, we have just a few minutes left at the top till we are wrapped up. So I do want to have one final call for questions. If you do have any, go ahead and send those in. In the meantime, I do want to kind of go round robin around the table and touch on maybe some best practices, some final advice, or maybe some key takeaways from this program. So Carl, do you have anything for our audience, anything you feel they absolutely need to walk away from this program knowing?
Sorry, knocked something over. I think if in any part of their business they're looking at modernizing their business or even migrating away from their on-prem data center type environments and then modernizing later down the line, it's always best to, work with a partner that does this as a day job, if that makes sense, in terms of what I said earlier. I think a lot of customers come unstuck when they try to do it themselves. They may not have the skills in-house, but try to, cut corners or save money in some way. I think the best way to do that is to engage with a partner, like Nordcloud or someone else that can help them on that journey. And we have the skills in-house. We've invested a lot of time and money in our business to help customers like W3Schools on that journey. I think the one takeaway would be if you've got a project that you're thinking about this year or working on at the moment and need assistance, please do get in touch. We are a worldwide organization, so geography doesn't really come into it, although we're more European based, as we all know. But I think engage where we can, and if you can utilize our skills, then great. We can advise them on the best way to go, like we did with Jan in the business at W3Schools.
Mm-hmm.
Jan, do you want to take that next stab at it?
Did you say Jan?
Yes, sir.
Sorry, I have a little bit of a lag here, as you know from before. But I can only second what Carl is saying. like make sure to fill the gaps with competencies that exists in your like in-house team, contact partners, etc. Get second opinion on things. That's the best advice or takeaway, I think. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think I can only echo that repeat rather, that we have that free evaluation where Nordcloud will help you identify 1 or 2 workloads that can be modernized or will bring the most ROI on your modernization. I'll just put that in the chat, and I think Cody has been kind enough to pin that message to the top of the chat. There were some questions around that page not working or not downloading well or something. There's some information at the bottom of the page is the form that you need to fill in to get in touch with us. So yeah, it's in the handout section. It's now in the chat as well.
All right, I'm just checking to see if we received any more questions. It looks like we have one. We've got time for one final question. So it says, I think Jan mentioned container image size as a limiting factor in workloads. It says they didn't consider for containerization. Does he have some size of description in their case? I can think of other factors, even if a few.
Could you repeat that question?
Sure. And let me also place it up on the screen for us. But says, I think Jan mentioned container image size as a limiting factor, RE, workloads they didn't consider for containerization.
No, what I was mentioning was that some of our like base images for some of the programming languages, like the Rust image, etc., they are quite large in the gigabyte range. So deployment times will be quite large. And you should, of course, like Stefan also mentioned, keep sizes to a bare minimum there to make stuff happen quicker, basically, when doing deployment. So yeah, I guess that's kind of an iteration from our point of view. We got that image and functionality into production, and then we kind of continuous iterating, making stuff faster, etc. So, and also reducing our container images, of course.
Yeah. If there was a specific size of question, I would say anything under 500 megabytes is okay. Definitely try to keep it under a gigabyte when it comes to any container image.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Can't let that one run away from you. So I've got up on the slide the list of resources. You can download these slides in the handout section, and then from there grab the resources. However, that running containers AWS link is in the handout section already. So if you just want to grab that one, it is there for you. Jan, Carl, and Stefan, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciated having all 3 of you on here, and I feel like I'm really learning a lot and walking away from this conversation with a little bit of a headache. So thank you so much for everything that you poured into this today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
A pleasure. Thanks, Cody, for hosting.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So I would like to remind our audience that today's session was recorded. Following this, you'll receive an email with a link to access the recording on demand. Or, of course, you can find it living on the Container Journal website at containerjournal.com/webinars. And be sure to look in the on-demand section where it will be waiting for you. At the top of the hour, I mentioned we would be giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So our winners are Danny C., Sylvia G., Martin S., and Ishmael B. So to our 4 winners, congratulations. Keep an eye on your email inbox to claim that gift card. If you don't happen to see that email in about the next 48 hours, check your spam folder just in case it gets filtered out. I'd like to thank AWS and Nordcloud for sponsoring our program today. And to our audience, thank you so much for being here. We really value your time, and we're really glad you spent the last hour with us. We do just want to ask for 1 more minute of your time for a survey that will pop up as soon as we close out. We'd love to hear your feedback on not only our presentation today, but if you have suggestions for an upcoming event, please send that along, and we'd love to try to incorporate your ideas. Regardless, we do hope to see everyone at a future Techstrong learning experience. Have a great rest of your day. And Carl, Stefan, Jan, thank you all once more.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye. Bye.
Take care. Bye.